In September 2009, Rio Doce's co-founder, Javier Valdez Cárdenas, published Hitman, a confession of an assassin in Ciudad Juarez. Days later, a grenade exploded in their office. Here are some people who pissed off the wrong cartels. A former police officer and Marine, Enrique Kamarena, joins the DEA in the 1970s, determined to fight the growing drug trade. By the early 1980s, he's stationed in Guadalajara, Mexico, right in the heart of cartel territory, and his main target is the Guadalajara cartel, run by Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, and Rafael Caro Quintero. At the time, Mexican cartels would be expanding rapidly, fueled by coke in Colombia and massive marijuana farms. Camarena went undercover, gathering intel and slowly piecing together the cartel's operations. He struck a major blow when he uncovered Rancho Búfalo, a 2,500-acre marijuana plantation worth billions. In 1984, the Mexican military, with the help from the DEA, raided the farm and burnt the crops. That didn't sit well with the cartel bosses, though, and on February 7, 1985, as Camarena was leaving the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara, cartel operatives kidnapped him in broad daylight. What happened next would be nothing short of a nightmare, as they take him to a safe house, where he's brutally tortured for over 30 hours. They beat him with a cattle prod and even drill into his skull, all while an affiliated doctor kept him conscious to prolong the agony. Why so much brutality, though? Because the cartel believed that he knew too much about their operations and wanted information. But he never broke, and eventually they killed him, dumping his body in a rural area. A month later, they found his remains, with his body showing clear signs of torture. His murder shook the DEA and the U.S. government to its core. The agency would launch Operation Leyenda, which would be the largest DEA homicide investigation in history. Several cartel members, including Caro Quintero and Fonseca Carrillo, were arrested. But Gallardo, the cartel's mastermind, managed to stay free for 4 more years before his eventual capture in 1989. However, many believe that the investigation was hindered by corrupt officials protecting cartel interests. Camarena's death led to a massive crackdown and a stain on U.S.-Mexican relations. It also became a rallying cry for the DEA, inspiring stricter drug policies and deeper involvement in cartel wars. His legacy lives on, with a lot of awards, schools, and even Red Ribbon Week, a nationwide campaign against drug abuse, honoring his sacrifice. But the biggest question remains, did his death truly weaken the cartels? Because if anything, they kind of grew stronger, splintered into smaller, deadlier factions. But Camarena's story is a tragic reminder of the high price paid in the war on drugs. September 2009. Rio Doce, a weekly dedicated to crime and corruption in Sinaloa, founded by Javier Valdez Cárdenas, published a series on drug trafficking entitled Hitman, Confession of an Assassin in Ciudad Juarez, after which a grenade was then thrown into Rio Doce's office, damaging the building, but fortunately causing no injuries. However, this was one of Cárdenas' accomplishments toward the fight against the cartels, leading him to a point of no return. Javier knew the risks. In Mexico, reporting on cartels is like signing your own death warrant. But it wouldn't stop him, because for years, he fearlessly exposed the brutality of drug cartels, corruption, and the violence strangling his country. His work was raw, honest, and dangerous, and ultimately, it cost him his life. Born in Culiacán, Sinaloa, one of Mexico's most dangerous cartel strongholds, Valdez spent decades as a journalist. He worked for national outlets, but was best known for co-founding Rio Doce, an independent newspaper that dug deep into the bloody world of drug trafficking. But unlike mainstream media, Rio Doce really didn't sugarcoat things. It named names, exposed cartels' influence over politics, and would show some brutal realities that most people were too afraid to speak about. Valdez also wrote books that gave a human face to the drug war. Works like Miss Narco and Los Modos del Narco told stories of young people sucked into cartel life, often against their will. He wasn't just reporting the news, he was recording a national tragedy. and the cartels noticed. On May 15, 2017, Javier was heading towards his office in Culiacan when a car stops beside him. Gunmen force him out of his car and shoot him 12 times, leaving his body there on the street. Now, why was he killed like this? Valdez had been covering chaos within the Sinaloa cartel and Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's extradition to the U.S. And with El Chapo gone, his sons and rival factions were fighting for control, leading to some brutal betrayals. Valdez had written about it, and some believe he got too close to the truth. His murder sparked outrage, both in Mexico and worldwide. Protests erupted, journalists demanded justice, chanting, "They're killing us." The Mexican government promised an investigation. But if we learn anything from history, it's that cartel-related murders rarely led to some real consequences. Then, in 2020, a breakthrough. Juan Francisco El Quillo Picos, a cartel hitman, was sentenced to 14 years for Valdez's murder. It's one of those rare cases where justice, however small, was actually served, but the mastermind behind the hit, still unknown. Even in death, Javier's voice hasn't been silenced. His books, articles, and legacy continue to expose the horrors of cartel violence. Again, he knew the risks and chose to tell the truth anyway. And that's why he'll never be forgotten. In 2006, Valentine Elizalde came out with a song that was pretty much an insult to one of Mexico's most brutal cartels, thereby changing the course of his life forever. This guy was a legend in the making, known as El Gallo de Oro, the Golden Rooster. He was one of Mexico's most popular norteño and banda musicians. His music was loud, proud, and full of life. But in the world of narcocorridos, songs about drug cartels, one wrong lyric can get you killed. And that's exactly what happened here. Born in Sonora, Mexico, Elizalde grows up surrounded by music. His father was a well-known musician, and Valentine would follow in his footsteps. By the early 2000s, he'd become one of the biggest names in Mexican regional music, belting out songs about love, heartbreak, and the violent world of cartels. But there was one song in particular that would seal his fate, A mis enemigos, To My Enemies. This wasn't just any song. It was seen as a direct taunt to Los Zetas, one of Mexico's most brutal cartels. The lyrics spoke about betrayal, revenge, and rising above enemies, and many believed it was a tribute to the Sinaloa cartel, the Zetas' bitter rivals. Whether or not he meant it that way didn't matter. Once a cartel sees you as an enemy, there's no turning back. On November 25, 2006, after a concert in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, deep in Zetas territory, Elizalde had left the venue in his black SUV with his manager and driver. Minutes later, a convoy of gunmen ambush him. The killers fire over 70 bullets, hitting Elizalde multiple times in the head and chest. His manager and driver were also killed in the process. His murder sent shockwaves throughout Mexico. Fans were devastated. Rumors swirled about who ordered that. Some believed it was Los Zetas, punishing him for what they saw as an insult. Others thought it was an internal dispute over his ties to certain cartel figures. Either way, the case remains officially cold. His legacy, however, does live on. His music skyrocketed in popularity right after his death, and his song A Mis Enemigos became an anthem of defiance. His cousin, Tano Elizalde, who survived that attack, later faced accusations of setting him up, though no proof ever really surfaced. Today, Valentine Elizalde is remembered as a man who got caught in the crossfire of Mexico's deadly cartel wars. Whether he meant to or not, he pissed off the wrong people and paid the ultimate price. June 5, 2016, an article by Miroslava Briash stated that members of organized crime were attempting to enter politics through drug trafficking corridors, notably through the Institutional Revolutionary Party, PRI, and the National Action Party, PAN. However, this revelation would actually lead to her own demise. Briash knew the risks. In Mexico, exposing cartel corruption is a death sentence. But that never stopped her. For decades, Miroslava fearlessly reported on organized crime, political corruption, and the brutal violence suffocating her home state of Chihuahua. She wasn't writing little blogs and whatnot. She uncovered truths that powerful people wanted buried. Born in Chihuahua, Mexico, Miroslava was a journalist with a mission to tell the stories that everyone else was afraid of. She worked for La Hornada, a national newspaper, and El Norte de Juarez, focusing on drug cartels, political corruption, and the growing number of disappearances. Her investigations were relentless. She exposed how the drug cartels were getting into politics, and how politicians were in bed with these guys, and how violence was consuming entire communities, stuff we already knew, but now it's on paper. She also uncovered assassinations of activists and indigenous leaders, people who resisted the cartel's control. But one of her most dangerous reports would be about cartel-backed candidates running in Chihuahua's 2016 local elections. She revealed that the Juarez cartel and Sinaloa cartel were handpicking politicians to serve their own interests. The report ultimately sealed her fate. So on March 23, 2017, at 6:50 a.m., Miroslava's sitting outside in her car at her house, ready to take her son to school. And then a gunman walks up, fires 8 shots, and leaves a chilling note.
For being a snitch, your next governor, El Ochenta.
And just like that, one of Mexico's most fearless journalists was silenced. After her death, shockwaves ran through Mexico and beyond. Protests erupted. Journalists demanded justice, and international organizations condemned the killing. The Mexican government promised another investigation. But in a country where 90% of these journalists' murders go unpunished, few had any kind of hope. Then in 2020, there was a breakthrough. Juan Carlos Moreno Ochoa, aka El Larry, a cartel hitman, was sentenced to 50 years in prison for orchestrating Miroslava's murder. But was justice really served? The real masterminds, like the politicians and cartel leaders, were never arrested. The people Miroslava exposed are still in power, and journalists in Mexico are still being killed. June 26, 2010. Sergio Vega is interviewed for an article on the entertainment website La Orea, which confirmed he was still alive. And that's only because of the rumors that had spread saying he was dead. Sergio Vega, known as El Shaka, was regarded as the voice of the streets, a storyteller of Mexico's underworld. He would make a name for himself in narcocorridos, the controversial genre that glorifies drug lords, violence, and the harsh realities of being in a cartel. But in Mexico, singing about cartels really can be as dangerous as working for them, like we previously seen. And for Sergio, it turned out like being on death row. Born in Sonora, Mexico, Sergio Vega started out like many musicians, playing these small gigs, struggling to make a name for himself. But by the 1990s and early 2000s, this guy was a rising star in narcocorrido, a genre dominated by groups like Los Tigres del Norte and Los Tucanes de Tijuana. His songs weren't just catchy, they were raw, telling stories of the drug trade, powerful cartel bosses, and the dangers of that lifestyle. The more he sang, the bigger he got. His music resonated with so many, especially those living in cartel-controlled territories. But not everyone was a fan, especially the cartels. And by 2010, rumors started going around that Vega was a marked man. The deaths of several narcocorrido singers, including Valentine Elizalde, had already sent a clear message. Some stories weren't meant to be sung. But Sergio, forever defiant, brushed off these rumors. On June 26, 2010, he gives this interview, denying reports that he'd been targeted for assassination. He laughs off the idea that he's in danger, saying that he'd taken extra precautions, including traveling with bodyguards. But just hours later, the unthinkable happened. That same night, as he's driving to a concert in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, gunmen in a black car began following his red Cadillac. The moment he realized what was happening, he tried to speed away, but it was too late. The killers open fire, hitting him multiple times in the head and chest before his car crashes off the road. And all that after he told the world he was safe. His death, like so many others, was never truly solved. No arrests, no justice, just another voice, silenced. But that music man lives on, and his story remains a cautionary tale. For years, Regina Martinez Perez fearlessly reported on corruption, drug cartels, and government cover-ups. But in 2012, her relentless pursuit of the truth cost her everything. Now, Regina wasn't just any reporter. She was one of the most respected investigative journalists in Veracruz, a really dangerous state for journalists. She worked for Proceso, a national magazine known for its hard-hitting investigative journalism. Her focus? Political corruption and cartel violence, exposing how high-ranking officials were working hand-in-hand with drug lords, how disappearances would be swept under the rug, and how the government was failing to protect its people. You see, in Veracruz, where cartels are running rampant, politicians often play both sides. And Regina's reporting wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. On April 28, 2012, this poor woman was found beaten and strapped to death in her home in Jalapa, Veracruz. Her house showed no signs of a forced entry, and her body bore clear marks of a brutal struggle. Someone definitely wanted her silenced, permanently. At first, authorities would push the usual story, a robbery gone wrong. But no one believed this crap. This wasn't a random crime. It was obviously an execution. The outcry was immediate. Journalists, activists, and human rights organizations all demanded justice. The government would be under pressure and then arrested a man named Jorge Hernandez, claiming that he killed Regina over a robbery dispute. But that case was riddled with inconsistencies, and many believed he was just a scapegoat. Then, in 2017, an explosive investigation by a team of global journalists known as the Forbidden Stories Project revealed what many suspected. Regina was killed because of her work, because she'd been digging into links between Veracruz's government and the Zetas cartel. Now, her case remains officially solved. But for those who knew her work, the real masterminds, those corrupt officials and cartel leaders, again were never brought to justice. Regina Martinez Perez paid the ultimate price for telling the truth. Even after death, her work hasn't been erased. Her reports remain a testament to the brutal reality of Veracruz and the dangers journalists face in Mexico. January 25, 1992. Chalino Sanchez is performing at the Plaza Los Arcos restaurant and nightclub in Coachella, California, where chaos erupted as a man fires some shots at him while he fires right back. But little did he know that surviving that attack would clear the road to his eventual demise. Chalino Sanchez was a legend. His life played out like one of those narco corridos he sang about, full of danger, revenge, and ultimately, a tragic ending. He didn't just sing about the cartel underworld, he lived it. And in 1992, someone decided he'd sung his last song. Born Rosalino Sanchez Felix in Sinaloa, Mexico, Chalino's life would be marked by extreme violence from an early age. When he was just a teenager, his sister was allegedly assaulted by a powerful man. Chalino wouldn't go to the cops though, he went straight for revenge. He tracked this man down and shot him dead. And that decision forced him to flee to the US, where he would build a new life, but never really leave his past behind. In Los Angeles, Chalino finds himself surrounded by immigrants who missed home, and many of them were connected to the cartel world. He realized something. These people wanted music that told their stories, raw and unfiltered. And that's when he started writing some corridos, personalized ballads for criminals, drug lords, and outlaws. But his songs didn't just entertain. They documented the lives and deaths of the underworld. But before long, Chalino wasn't just writing corridos, he was performing them, and his fame exploded. Chalino's lyrics were fearless, calling out cartel figures by name, celebrating their exploits, and even hinting at betrayals. This made him both loved and hated. To some, he was a hero. To others, a liability. Then came the first warning. In 1992, during a concert in Coachella, a man jumps on stage and starts shooting right at him. In true Chalino fashion, he pulls out his own gun and fires right back. Chaos erupts, people are screaming. And when the dust settled, Chalino had been shot in the lung, but he survived. And then he became more famous. But that fame did more damage than good. On May 16, 1992, Chalino's performing in Culiacan, Sinaloa. Midway through the show, someone hands him a note. He reads it, looks visibly shaken, but keeps singing. That piece of paper, many think it was a death threat. And the next morning, while driving with friends, Chalino's car is stopped by men dressed as police officers. They take him, and hours later his body's found dumped in an irrigation canal, blindfolded, wrists tied, and shot twice in the back of the head. The murder was never solved, but Chalino became immortal. His music is still played, his story is obviously still told, and his legacy remains untouched. Mosey Sanchez Cerezo knew that being a journalist in Mexico would be one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, especially if you're going to expose corruption and crime, but he didn't care. He wasn't some big-name reporter working for a powerful media outlet. He was a humble, independent journalist in Veracruz, the state we talked about before. Cerezo wasn't a traditional journalist. He wasn't out there chasing headlines for fame and money. He was a taxi driver by trade, but his passion was uncovering the truth. He ran a small local newspaper, La Unión, where he reported on cartel violence, corrupt government officials, and the growing number of disappearances in Veracruz. His articles weren't just words on a page, they were calls to action, as he exposed how these cartels operate freely, how police are either helping them or just too afraid to act, and how politicians were failing the people. When entire families went missing, Moses was the one asking the questions, and those in power didn't like that very much. On January 2, 2015, armed men would storm his house in Medellín de Bravo, Veracruz. They took Mosey's laptops, notebooks, and him as well. Witnesses say the men were heavily armed and moving with military precision. His family knew immediately this wasn't a robbery, it was a kidnapping. His son Jorge refused to stay quiet. He went public, calling out the authorities and demanding answers. The pressure grew, and finally, officials made an announcement. Moses was dead. His body was found 3 weeks later, mutilated and dumped like garbage. Authorities arrested a local police officer who confessed that the mayor of Medellín de Bravo, Omar Cruz Reyes, ordered the hit. According to the officer, the mayor was tired of Moses exposing his corruption and wanted him silenced also, permanently. But this is Mexico. Omar Cruz Reyes fled, and to this day, he's still out there. Mosey Sanchez Cerezo was regarded as a voice for the voiceless. His murder was meant to send a message: stop asking questions or else. But instead, his death ignited outrage. Protests erupted. Journalists worldwide were condemning this attack, and his name would become another symbol of the fight for press freedom in Mexico. They took his life, but they can't take his story. And as long as people remember what he stood for, Mosey Sanchez Cerezo will never be silenced. In the world of cartel violence, where kidnappings and murders happen daily, Felix Batista was a rare figure. This guy wasn't a journalist exposing secrets, nor a cop hunting down drug lords. He was a negotiator. A man stepping into the fire, working behind the scenes to bring kidnapped victims home safely. This guy's faced dangerous situations before. But in December 2008, in Saltillo, Mexico, the hunter became the hunted. Felix Batista was a former U.S. Army officer and security consultant specializing in hostage negotiations. He would work for ASI Global, a security firm based in Houston, Texas, helping families and companies deal with kidnappings for ransom. His expertise made him well known in Mexico's security circles. He would train law enforcement, give advice on how to survive abductions, and even had successfully negotiated the release of many kidnapped victims. But again, in a world controlled by ruthless, dangerous cartels, knowing too much can be deadly. On December 10, 2008, Felix Batista was in Saltillo, Coahuila, giving anti-kidnapping advice to business owners. That evening, while having dinner at a local restaurant, he gets a phone call saying that a kidnapping victim he was helping had just been released. Shortly after, 4 armed men arrive outside the restaurant, waiting for him. Surveillance suggests that Felix left voluntarily, possibly believing he was going to go help somebody. Witnesses said he even sent a text message to his colleagues just before leaving. An hour later, just as promised, the kidnapped victim was released. But Felix himself wasn't so lucky. Since that night, there's been no sign of Felix Batista. No ransom demand, no proof of life. Nothing. His case quickly became one of Mexico's most mysterious disappearances. Now, many believed he was targeted by the Zetas cartel, ruling over Coahuila at that time. Felix had successfully negotiated the release of many victims before, but did he anger the wrong people? Despite pressure from Mexican and U.S. authorities, no arrests have been made. His family, especially his wife, Lourdes Batista, has fought for answers. But even after more than a decade, and even as of September 2024, the silence still remains deafening. Felix Batista risked everything to save other people, but in the end, no one was there to save him. His disappearance is a chilling reminder that even the best in the business aren't safe when they piss off the wrong cartel. As we already know, standing up to these cartels in Mexico often comes at a deadly price. And Edelmiro Cavasos Leal knew the risks. As an ambitious young man who served as the mayor of Santiago, a picturesque town in Nuevo León, he wanted to bring order and progress to his community. But in a place where cartels are calling the shots, that's not so easy. Cavasos refused to play by cartel rules. Now, he was only 38 years old when he became the mayor of Santiago in 2009. A U.S.-educated politician studying at the University of Texas and had big dreams for his hometown. He wasn't a hardened cop or even a military man, just a leader who wanted to clean up corruption and make Santiago a safe, prosperous place. But there was one problem. The Zetas controlled that place, and they didn't take kindly to politicians refusing to cooperate. So on the night of August 15, 2010, just after midnight, armed men stormed into Cavasos' home. Turns out some of these people were even local police officers, making the betrayal brutal. Eventually, Cavasos was kidnapped, shoved into a vehicle, and driven away. 3 days later, on August 18th, his body's found on a roadside. His hands tied, his face covered, and he'd been shot multiple times. The message, again, was clear. This is what happens to those who defy the cartel. As you can imagine, his murder also sent shockwaves across the planet. A mayor being executed so publicly, it was a sign that even elected officials had no protection. And again, the wonderful government promises justice, and within days, 7 people are arrested, including some police officers from Santiago. These suspects were linked to Los Zetas, the cartel known for its extreme brutality. Investigators thought Cavasos was killed because he refused to cooperate with the cartel's demands. Maybe he'd stopped protecting them. Maybe he refused to give them contracts. Or maybe, just maybe, he thought he could govern without fear. More than a decade later, Santiago still remembers him, not just as a mayor, but as a man who believed in something greater than fear.